The stories are separated by this following sound. It started with those damn TikTok videos. Night after night, my feed filled with skinwalker encounters, each one more unsettling than the last. I'd scroll past them at first, dismissing them as just another internet trend. But something about those stories lodged in my mind like a splinter, especially after I learned what skinwalkers truly were. Ancient Navajo witches with the power to possess and transform into animals. I wouldn't have given these legends a second thought if it weren't for Mina. We found her on a stormy autumn evening, a German shepherd lying badly hurt by the side of the road. My parents, being the kind souls they are, couldn't leave her there. The vet said she'd make a full recovery, and within weeks, she became part of our family. I fell in love with those intelligent eyes and gentle demeanor. She was perfect. Too perfect. Looking back, Mina was really smart. She once opened my door, which I know a lot of dogs can do that. But listen to this. We have an older dog, Misty, and if we have to give her medicine from like the vet, we just wrap it in cheese, and she doesn't even notice the pill is in there. But Mina, she knew. She'd stare at the treat, then at us, with an intelligence that felt wrong somehow. Even when we ground the medicine into powder and mixed it thoroughly into her food, she wouldn't touch it. My father joked that she must be expert in chemistry. But what happened that night changed everything. I was dozing on the couch, some horror movie casting flickering shadows on the walls. The house was silent, except for the TV's soft murmur. Then I heard it. The distinct sound of a door opening and closing, followed by footsteps. Not the click of dog claws on hardwood, but human footsteps. Through heavy eyelids, I saw a figure approaching. It moved with an unnatural gait, like someone wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. As it drew closer, my blood turned to ice. It was Mina, standing upright on two legs. I wanted to scream, but terror had stolen my voice. She stood there, swaying slightly, those familiar eyes fixed on mine. Then something impossible happened. Her eyes began to glow with a crimson light that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wrong. Her form shifted. One moment she was Mina, the next a writhing shadow that hurt my eyes to look at, before settling back into the shape of my beloved dog. Then she turned and walked away, now on all four legs, as if nothing had ever happened. Morning came, and with it, my mother's gentle skepticism when I told her what I'd seen. I don't blame her. I barely believed it myself. But I know what I saw. Sometimes, late at night, when I hear Mina scratching at my locked bedroom door, that image flashes through my mind. My dog, standing like a person, watching me with eyes that held something old and hungry behind them. These days, when someone mentions skinwalkers, I find an excuse to leave a room, because I know now that some legends don't stay on TikTok. Some of them come home with you, curl up at your feet, and wait. I still love Mina, or whatever wears her shape, but I'll never let her into my room again. And sometimes, when she looks at me with those intelligent eyes, I wonder, does she know that I know? And more importantly, what she can do. It's funny how friendships work. Mine began in high school, one of those chance encounters that somehow spiral into years of shared experiences. We weren't drawn together by common interests or shared passions. It was more like life kept throwing us into each other's orbits. Same college, same neighborhood, same workplace. A cosmic coincidence that lasted for years. Then, like many adult friendships, it began to unravel. She changed jobs first, and our regular lunches became sporadic catch-ups. When I moved to the suburbs, our connection dwindled to the bare minimum. birthday wishes, and holiday greetings. Those perfunctory check-ins that keep a friendship technically alive but barely breathing. This year, though, fate seemed determined to reconnect us. On my birthday, she messaged me with news. She was buying a house just 10 minutes from mine. Another coincidence in our coincidence-laden friendship. After her housewarming party, the messages started flowing again, like a river finding its old course. Summer was approaching, and our schedules didn't align for proper catch-ups before my vacation. But we texted daily, and that's when I learned about Boots. The cat was a rescue, a sleek black creature with pristine white paws that looked like little shoes. That's where his name came from. Through pictures and videos, I watched this feline charmer work her magic. Loving, cuddly, the perfect companion. So when I returned from my holiday and my friend needed someone to cat sit for a week, I didn't hesitate. I even offered to host Boots at my place, but with my dog an equation and unknown variables about Boots' temperament, we decided I'd visit her house instead. The arrangement was simple. I'd stop by each evening, handle the basics, food, water, litter, and provide some companionship. My friend's flight left before mine landed, so she gave me her garage code instead of keys. Simple enough, right? Just an ordinary favor for an old friend. The first evening started innocuously. I arrived around 8:30, Boots' dinner time. She devoured her wet food while I watched. Then we moved on to playtime. What's your favorite toy, Boots? I asked playfully, not expecting a response. But Boots locked eyes with me, darted into the bedroom, and returned with an orange plastic mouse. I felt a slight unease at her apparent comprehension, but rationalized it away. Surely my friend used similar phrases, and Boots had simply learned to associate them with her preferred toy. Cats are clever that way, aren't they? The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. I settled on the couch with a book, covered by a blanket, while Boots kneaded the fabric contentedly before curling up on my stomach, purring herself to sleep. I snapped some photos for my friend, earning an appreciative response. Of Boots, what's this? I waved my hand in front of my face. What a farty butthole you have, miss. Very unbecoming for a lady. Boots meowed, was it indignantly, and jumped off the couch. Come on, Bootsy. I mean it. I called after her. Checking my phone, I saw it was past 11 p.m. Time to head home. The second night followed a similar pattern. Same routine, same couch cuddles, and then that smell again. Acrid, unnatural, almost chemical. What is this? I tried to catch Boots for a closer inspection, wondering if she needed her anal glands expressed like dogs sometimes do. But she evaded my grasp, retreating to the far side of the room with a meow that seemed almost knowing. Fine, miss. I have to go anyway. I called after her, but as I gathered my things to leave that second night, something felt off. The house seemed different somehow, as if the air had grown thicker. And Boots was watching me from the darkness of the hallway, her eyes reflecting the light in a way that made my skin crawl. I didn't know it then, but these first 2 nights were just the beginning. The third night was when everything changed. The moment I stepped through the door, that smell hit me. Strong, sulfurous, and somehow more invasive than before. It wasn't just unpleasant. It felt wrong, like something that shouldn't exist in a normal house with a normal cat. I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard as I tried to phrase my concern to my friend without sounding alarmist. Is it okay if we skip the wet food? There's a really strong smell, kind of like sulfur. I finally typed, adding that it reminded me of my French bulldog's reaction to cheese. Something about Boots' digestion clearly needed attention. My friend's response was surprisingly casual. She asked about the litter box, which was normal. Everything there looked exactly as it should. Her suggestion to reduce the portion came with a casual explanation. Boots apparently gets gassy when stressed. It seemed reasonable enough, but something about it felt off. I opened the windows to clear the air, keeping a watchful eye to ensure Boots didn't make a break for freedom. I went through the motions of my caretaking duties. Fresh water, topped up dry food, all the usual routines. But when I settled onto the couch, something was different. Boots didn't come to join me. Instead, she took a position across the room, those piercing green eyes fixed on me with intensity that made my skin crawl. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. The darkness seemed to gather around her black fur, making her white paws stand out like ghostly anchors to reality. I tried to focus on my book, but the way of that unblinking gaze made the words swim on the page. The minutes crawled by like hours until I couldn't take it anymore. At 10:05, I made my excuses and fled. The drive home was haunted by the image of those eyes. How do you tell someone their beloved pet feels wrong? Your cat is creepy and stinks wasn't exactly the kind of message you send to maintain a rekindled friendship. So I kept my concerns to myself, trying to rationalize away the growing unease. Night 4 started with a new peculiarity. The house was completely dark when I arrived, even though I distinctly remembered leaving both the staircase and hallway lights on the night before. My first thought was a blown fuse, but when I flipped the switch, the lights came on immediately. It was a small thing, easily explained away, but added to the growing pile of small things that didn't quite make sense. The sulfur smell lingered, perhaps even stronger than before. I opened the windows again, hoping the night air would clear away both the smell and my mounting anxiety. This time, Boots wasn't waiting at the door for her dinner. Instead, I found her at the bottom of the attic stairs, a black silhouette against the shadows. I called out, trying to inject some normalcy into the situation. Those green eyes just stared back, unblinking. "Boots, come here." I tried again, taking a few steps toward her. As I approached, she began to climb the attic stairs, her movements deliberate and somehow wrong. I stopped, suddenly very aware of how much I didn't want to follow her up those stairs. "All right, you know where your food is. You'll find me on the couch." I called up, trying to sound casual despite the tremor in my voice. But as I turned away from those stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The cold hit me next, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The thermostat confirmed my suspicions. The temperature had dropped several degrees. When I texted my friend about it, her response was the same dismissive, "Don't worry about it." That was becoming a pattern. Seeking warmth, I went to her bedroom to search for a blanket or duvet. That's when I heard it, the sound that would mark the beginning of something far worse than cold or strange smells. Footsteps, tiny but distinct, right above my head. My heart stuttered in my chest before rationality kicked in. It must be Boots in the attic, probably hunting rats. I tried to convince myself that her heavy footfalls were normal. After all, she was a bit heavier, and modern house cats aren't exactly stealth predators anymore, right? Armed with a thick duvet and a cup of hot tea, I settled back on the couch with my book. About 20 minutes later, Boots descended from her hunting grounds, prowling around the couch. "Come on, silly goose. I'm sorry I called you a stinky poo." I coaxed, tried to restore our earlier rapport. She jumped up, and that's when I noticed something in her mouth. "What's that, Bootsy?" I leaned closer, extended my hand. "What do you have there?" What happened next was straight out of a horror movie for the unprepared. Boots delicately deposited her prize in my outstretched palm, a rat, presumably dead. The moment my brain registered what I was holding, I let out a shriek that probably scared every other rodent in the neighborhood and involuntarily launched the rat across the room. The dead rat, it turned out, was merely stunned. Upon impact with the floor, it sprang to life and bolted, with Boots in hot pursuit. The chase ended at what appeared to be a hole in the kitchen wall. The rat's salvation and Boots' frustration. I dutifully reported this development to my friend, suggesting some pest control might be in order. Her response? Don't worry about it. Of course. Boots returned to her dinner as if nothing had happened, and I tried to return to my book. She eventually settled at my feet, but that sulfuric smell still clung to her like a second skin. 3 more days in Mommy's home, I told her, feeling guilty about assuming her digestive issues were stress-related. She turned those piercing green eyes on me, but then I heard again footsteps above us, heavier this time. Boots' reaction was instant. Her pupils dilated until those ethereal green irises were mere rings around bottomless black pools. Freaking rats. I said aloud, but the words rang hollow. Those footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate to be rats. The clock showed nearly midnight, and suddenly I couldn't leave fast enough. Oh my, it's almost 12, Bootsy. I must leave you. I gathered my things with trembling hands. As I hurried toward the garage stairs, the footsteps above matched my pace, driving me faster until I burst out into the blessed normalcy of the night air. The next evening, I debated whether to go at all, but obligation won out over fear. I'd made a promise to both friend and cat. I compromised. Get in, handle the essentials, get out. Saturday would be different. Daylight would make everything feel less threatening, and I could make up for tonight's abbreviated visit. But even the simplest plans can go awry. Boots greeted me normally enough, weaving between my legs with familiar purrs. Hi, baby girl. I greeted her. I'm sorry, but this will be a short visit. The footsteps started almost immediately. Get in, feed, cat, get out became my mental mantra. I heard stomping above me as I prepared Boots' dinner, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the food bowl. The stomping followed me to the bathroom as I cleaned the litter box. But when I returned to the kitchen to check on Boots, something changed. The footsteps weren't following anymore. They were moving away, toward the stairs. Pure instinct took over, while my brain screamed at me to run. Something deeper, more primal, sent me scrambling through kitchen cupboards searching for salt. Any salt. The Himalayan salt grinder I found would have to do. I started grinding frantically, creating small piles of pink crystals on the counter. The stomping stopped. I froze, grinder still in hand, hardly daring to breathe in the sudden silence. Then, from somewhere in the darkness above, I heard. The footsteps were descending the stairs. There was no mistaking it now. With trembling hands, I gathered what salt I'd managed to grind into my palm and made a desperate dash for the stairs, keeping my eyes tightly shut. As I reached for the door, squinting through barely open eyes, the lights began to flicker violently, strobing the hallway in a manic dance of light and shadow. The footsteps had reached the hallway behind me. Each stomp sent vibrations through the floorboards, through my feet, through my racing heart. In blind panic, I began throwing salt over my shoulder while trying to remember a prayer. Any prayer? I started paying Our Father prayer. I hardly remember how it went. Last time I had prayed it when I was in high school, but I still got the words out of my mouth. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The footsteps continued. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The footsteps continued, faster now, running, closing the distance. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. Couple footsteps, and then silence right behind me, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation. Cold breath on my neck, whispers in a language that twisted away from understanding, and laughter from somewhere in the house. But deliver us from evil. Amen. The last words came out as a scream as I flung the remaining salt behind me. The effect was immediate. The whispers cut off, the footsteps ceased, the laughter died. The house settled back into ordinary silence, broken only by passing cars whose headlights swept harmlessly through the rooms. Whatever had been there was gone, but I didn't dare turn to look. I fumbled my way down to the garage, punched in the code with shaking fingers, and burst out into the night. From across the street, I looked back at the house. It appeared normal now, dark, quiet, unremarkable. I tried calling my friend through tears, then texting, but received no response. The thought of returning was unthinkable. Boots had enough dry food to last the remaining 2 days. I'd explained everything to my friend, and if she couldn't understand, well, that would have to be okay. On Sunday evening, I waited at the airport. My friend's 7 p.m. flight arrived on time, and when she emerged through the arrival gates, she looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Well, I figured you'd need a drive home. Plus, I need to tell you something." The whole story poured out of me. The cat, the smell, the footsteps, the terror. I showed her the photos I'd taken, including the ones I'd sent her during my visits. She listened in complete silence, her face growing paler with each detail. When I finished, she stopped walking, took my hands in hers, and looked me directly in the eyes. "Do you think I can stay with you tonight?" I stared at her in confusion. "You don't want to see if your cat is okay?" Her next words turned my blood to ice. "Andy, those pictures are undeniably from my house, but I don't have a cat." She held up her phone, showing me our message history. Our last exchange was from months ago, her thanking me for coming to the housewarming party. I haven't been back to her house since that night. Some questions are better left unanswered, some doors better left unopened. But sometimes late at night, I catch myself wondering about Boots, about her piercing green eyes, her white paws, and that sulfuric smell that clung to her like a shroud. And I wonder, if my friend didn't have a cat, then what exactly had I been feeding all those nights? I've never told many people this story. It's about our dog Bill and the inexplicable things that happened during his time with us. Looking back now, I wish I had paid more attention, documented more, but I was just a child then, and some memories have faded like old photographs. Bill came to us as a tiny pit bull mixed puppy, all wrinkles and oversized paws. My parents picked him from a local shelter, and from day one, there was something special about him, not in a supernatural way. At least not at first. He was just an exceptionally good dog, patient with children, protective without being aggressive, and possessing that uncanny intelligence that some dogs seem to have. The first hint that something was different started when Bill was still young. I don't remember this personally. I was too young. But my mother has told the story so many times that it feels like my own memory now. She would be doing something mundane, like folding laundry or preparing dinner, when Bill would suddenly stop whatever he was doing. His ears would perk up, his head would tilt, and then he would leap straight up into the air, snapping at something none of us could see. This wasn't the playful jumping that puppies do. According to my mother, there was purpose in his movements, precision even. He would track something with his eyes before jumping, following an invisible path across our living room ceiling or along the hallway walls. Sometimes he would make several jumps in succession, moving in a pattern that seemed to follow something. The strange thing was, this only ever happened inside our house. Outside, Bill was a normal, playful puppy. He would chase balls, play with other dogs, and roll in the grass like any other dog. But the moment we stepped back inside, there was always that possibility that he would start tracking those invisible things again. My parents were concerned enough to take him to the vet. They ran tests, checked his vision, his hearing, everything they could think of, but Bill was perfectly healthy. The vet suggested it might be a behavioral quirk that he would grow out of, and in a way, she was right. After several months of these episodes, they gradually became less frequent, and by the time Bill was fully grown, they had stopped completely. But that wasn't the end of the strange occurrences with Bill. As he grew older, other things began to happen, things that were harder to explain away. Some memories from childhood stick with you not because they're particularly significant, but because something about them feels wrong. For me, one such memory is from my first night alone at home. I was 12, and looking back now, I realize how that evening marked a subtle shift in how I understood reality. It was autumn. I remember that clearly. The days were getting shorter, and there was that particular crispness in the air that makes everything feel just a little bit sharper, a little bit more real. My parents had been invited to dinner at the Hendersons' house. Close friends who lived about 20 minutes away. Usually I would have gone with them, but I had been pushing for more independence lately, insisting I was old enough to stay home alone. After much discussion, they finally agreed. It'll only be for a few hours, Mom had said, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. We'll be back around 11, but you should be in bed by 9:30. She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the worry in her voice. I'll be fine, I assured her, probably sounding more confident than I felt. Bill's here with me. Bill had been with us for years by then. There was something reassuringly solid about having a dog his size around. He was mostly an indoor dog, though he had a kennel outside for when the weather was nice or when he needed some time in the yard. That evening, though, there was no question he'd be staying inside with me. Dad gave me the usual list of instructions. Keep the doors locked, don't answer for anyone, emergency numbers are on the fridge. Then they were gone, and for the first time in my life, I was truly alone in our house. Well, not completely alone. I had Bill. The house felt different immediately. It's strange how familiar spaces can transform when you're by yourself. The creaks and settlings that I normally wouldn't notice seemed louder, more purposeful. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper. I decided to retreat to my room, where I could create a cozy bubble with my TV and blankets. I had picked out a movie earlier, something age-appropriate that wouldn't add to my already slightly heightened nerves. Bill, as was his habit, had settled into his favorite spot under my bed. It was comforting knowing he was there, this solid presence just beneath me. I could hear his steady breathing mixing with the sound from the TV. The movie was engaging enough, but I found myself periodically seeking reassurance from Bill. I developed this habit of reaching down to scratch him whenever he was under there, and he would always respond with a gentle lick to my hand. It was our little ritual, this silent communication that said, "I'm here, you're here, everything's fine." Every so often during the movie, I'd stretch my arm down, feeling for his familiar fur. Each time, right on cue, there would be that warm, wet sensation of his tongue against my fingers. It was comforting, that predictable response. Reach down, get a lick, go back to watching the movie. Continue following the plot. The house made its usual noises. The hum of the heating system, the subtle tick of the old clock in the hallway, the occasional creak of wood adjusting to the cooling night air. But there was something else that evening, something I wouldn't notice until later. In retrospect, I should have paid more attention to the sounds I wasn't hearing, the ones that should have been there, but weren't, the subtle shifts that might have warned me that something wasn't quite right, because what happened next would make me question everything I thought I knew about that night, about Bill, and about what it really means to be alone in a house that suddenly feels much too quiet. It was past 9 p.m. when I headed to the kitchen for a snack. The movie had ended, and I was feeling pretty proud of myself for handling my first night alone so well. I remember thinking about how I'd tell my parents that they could trust me to stay home by myself more often. It's funny how quickly certainty can turn to terror. Our kitchen had this big window above the sink, the kind that looked out over the backyard. During the day, it was nice, letting in plenty of natural light while I helped Mom with the dishes. But at night, it became this black mirror, reflecting the kitchen's fluorescent lights and making the darkness beyond seem even darker. I was reaching for a package of cookies from the cabinet when something made me pause. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was just chance. But I looked out that window and my whole world shifted sideways. We had a light that pointed to the Bill's kennel. And in that kennel, unmistakably, was Bill. He was curled up in his usual spot, his white chest patch clearly visible, his head resting on his paws. He must have been there for hours. I stood there, cookie package clutched in my suddenly numb fingers, as my brain tried to process what I was seeing. If Bill was outside in his kennel, then what had been under my bed? What had been licking my hand? The realization hit me like a physical blow. My legs went weak and my stomach lurched violently. The cookies slipped from my grasp, hitting the linoleum with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden, terrible silence. Every time I had reached down, every lick I had felt, I couldn't go back to my room. The mere thought of what might be waiting under my bed made my skin crawl. My phone was still up there, sitting on my bedside table, but there was no way I was going back for it. Not now, not knowing. I ran. I didn't even stop to put on shoes. The kitchen door slammed behind me as I bolted across our backyard. I remember Bill raising his head as I passed his kennel, his tail wagging slightly in confusion at my presence. But I couldn't stop, not even for him. The Johnsons lived next door, an older couple who had been there since before we moved in. I had never been so grateful for their habit of staying up late to watch old movies. My bare feet slapped against the pavement as I ran up their driveway, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I must have looked half mad when Mrs. Johnson opened their door, barefoot, pale as a ghost, shaking uncontrollably. "Someone's in our house." I managed to gasp out. Mrs. Johnson, bless her, didn't waste time with questions. She ushered me inside, while Mr. Johnson immediately called my parents. The next 20 minutes were a blur. I sat on their floral couch, wrapped in an Afghan that smelled of mothballs, while Mrs. Johnson tried to get me to drink some tea with trembling hands. My parents must have broken several speed limits getting home. Mom burst through the Johnsons' door with wild eyes, gathering me into her arms while Dad was already on the phone with the police. I remember trying to explain what had happened, my words tumbling out in a jumbled mess about Bill and the bed and the licking. The police arrived quickly, 2 patrol cars and an AK-9 unit. I watched from the safety of the Johnsons' living room as flashlight beams swept through our house. The police dog caught a scent almost immediately. They followed it from my room, from under my bed, through the house to the basement door. The basement search was methodical and thorough. Every box was moved, every corner was examined, every possible hiding place was investigated, but whoever or whatever had been under my bed was gone. The only evidence that something had been there at all was police dogs' adamant interest in the area and some strange scuff marks on the basement floor near the small window that led outside. Later, when one of the officers was taking my statement, he mentioned something that still haunts me. He told me about cases he'd heard of, about people who find ways into homes and stay there, living in walls or crawl spaces or attics, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. They never did find out who was under my bed that night. We installed a security system the next day, and I didn't sleep in my room for months. Bill wasn't allowed outside in his kennel after dark anymore, and to this day, I always always check where he is before assuming anything about strange sensations in the dark. After the incident with whatever had been under my bed, things changed in our house. The most immediate change was my bed. I couldn't bear the thought of anything lurking beneath it, so I begged my parents to remove the legs. They understood. After what had happened, they probably would have rebuilt my entire room if I'd asked. So my mattress sat directly on the floor, eliminating any dark spaces underneath. Bill adapted to the new arrangement easily enough. Instead of his usual spot on the bed, he started sleeping next to me on the floor. It should have made me feel safer, and mostly it did. But there were still nights when the darkness felt too thick, too alive, and I'd lie awake listening to every creak and groan of our old house. The night it happened was about 3 months after the underbed incident. Our 2-story house had settled into its nighttime quiet. That peculiar silence that's never really silent at all. The heating system hummed softly. Tree branches scratched against windows. I'd gotten into the habit of sleeping with my bedroom door open. Partly it was for Bill's sake, so he'd come and go as he pleased, but if I'm honest, it was also for me. An open door meant a quick escape if I needed one, though I tried not to think too much about what I might be escaping from. The sound that woke me was familiar. The metallic clink of Bill's food bowl against the hardwood floor in the kitchen downstairs. It wasn't unusual for him to get midnight snacks. We always left some kibble in his bowl. I remember checking my phone. 3:17 a.m. That witching hour when the world feels thinnest, when the barrier between what should be and what is seems a blur. I was already drifting back to sleep when movement in the hallway caught my eye. My room was dark, but the hallway was dimly lit by the nightlight we'd installed after the incident. What I saw in that faint glow stopped my breath in my throat. A figure passed by my door. It moved with an odd, jerky grace, like someone doing a poor imitation of human walking. But it wasn't someone. It was Bill, our dog, walking upright on his hind legs like a person. The sight was so wrong, so fundamentally incorrect, that for a moment my brain refused to process it. Dogs don't walk like that. They can't walk like that unless they have been taught to do so. But there he was, his silhouette unmistakable against the hallway light, moving past my door with an almost casual gait. I lay there, frozen, as my mind tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was still dreaming. Maybe, but I knew what I'd seen. Bill's distinctive profile, his muscular pit bull frame, but wrong. All wrong. Standing upright. His head was held at an angle that no dog's neck should be able to achieve, and though I couldn't see his face clearly in the darkness, I had the terrible feeling that if I had, it wouldn't have been the face I knew. The sound that escaped my throat must have been audible, because the figure stopped. Just for a moment, it paused in its walking. I squeezed my eyes shut immediately, my heart hammering so hard I was sure it would burst. I lay there, rigid with terror, counting my heartbeats, waiting. The silence stretched out, broken only by a soft sound, something between a whimper and a laugh. When I finally gathered the courage to open my eyes again, the hallway was empty. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of Bill's nails clicking on the hardwood floor, walking normally on all fours as he made his way back to my room. He curled up next to my mattress as if nothing had happened. And within moments, his breathing had settled into the deep, regular rhythm of sleep. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to Bill's breathing and wondering about what I'd seen. Was it really Bill who had walked past my door? And if it was, what did that mean? The next morning, everything seemed normal. Bill was his usual self, eating his breakfast, wagging his tail, playing with his toys. I was 17 when we lost Bill. It was a quiet passing in his sleep, peaceful and ordinary in a way that seemed almost incongruous with the extraordinary events that had marked his life with us. The vet said it was natural causes, old age catching up with beloved family pet. I have tried to make sense of everything that had happened. I had researched paranormal phenomena, consulted with people who claimed to understand such things, and even went through a phase where I tried to convince myself it had all been the product of an overactive childhood imagination. But I know what I saw, what I experienced, what I felt. Our house itself became a subject of my investigation. I dug through local historical records, looking for any hint of previous unusual occurrences. But nothing. No tragic histories, no mysterious disappearances, no unexplained phenomena before we moved in or after Bill passed. Whatever strangeness had touched our lives seemed to have been inextricably linked to Bill himself. I'm 28 at the time of writing, living in my own apartment across town. Life has moved on in the way it tends to do, carrying me along with it through college, careers, relationships, and all the normal milestones of growing up. 3 years ago, I adopted Lucy. She is also Pitbull mix. Gladly, she doesn't jump at invisible things, doesn't inspire midnight terrors, and most certainly doesn't walk on two legs.